This has to do with Indo-China relations and a big development that actually came yesterday. This is a build-up on that. Yesterday, you remember, China released a map, and that map was much objection to that map was voiced by India through diplomatic channels because of the inclusion, for example, of Arunachal Pradesh and a number of other contested territories. Now, that was particularly important because it was coming, remember, just a few days also before the G20 meeting takes place in India, where Xi Jinping, the president of China, is expected to attend. Now we're getting a formal response from China. The Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson saying that Indian media reports related to this incident, which is the release, remember, of the 2023 edition of the Standard Map of China, they've called this a normal exercise that the country does every year. They've said it's an exercise in sovereignty, it's in accordance with their laws. He said he hopes that relevant parties will treat it objectively and not overinterpret it. This is the wording they've used. All right, let's take a brief walk through history lane till we wait for a reporter to join us. Changes like this have been introduced periodically by China. They do in fact release a map every year, but every year those changes are worth taking a note of. These changes have been taking place since 2017 and 2018 and 2019 too. In 2019, in fact, China made a very big show of burning 20,000 different maps that showed India and China differently. They made that point very publicly to point out that they would stand firm on what they believe is territorially theirs. China underneath, particularly President Xi Jinping, has been vociferous on this point in particular. It's obviously very interesting, though, for two reasons. A, as we told you, it comes a few days before G20. But B, this also comes a few days after Xi Jinping met with the Prime Minister on the sidelines of the BRICS summit. They are reported to have discussed something exactly like this, the East Ladakh situation. Let's go to my colleague Abhishek right now. Abhishek has joined us. Let's go to him for more context. Abhishek, tell us, we know that yesterday the issues taken with the map were conveyed to China via diplomatic channels. Now, China coming back with this response, don't over-interpret it. Abhishek, what should our audiences make of this?
Seriously, there is nothing left to interpret for anybody, even for, diplomacy is, of course, a very intense game between the two sides. But even for the layman, if you publish a map having included the territory of other nations who have sovereign right, respective sovereign right over those land masses, then there is hardly anything that one can, otherwise interpret other than knowing that you are trying to, aggressive and encroaching upon the territories of other countries. And this is what Chinese publication of the government map has done. But China is trying to brush it off as something that is not provocative, that is not serious in nature, and that should not be seen as an obstacle in the overall bilateral relationship, which India is, of course, has denied. India's External Affairs Minister, talking to media yesterday, has said, termed the map as an absurd thing. Indian Ministry of External Affairs has officially responded with the map, rejecting it and calling the embassy of China and raising the issue diplomatically. So clearly, India is not going to let this whole issue of China publishing the map, including Indian territories like Arunachal Pradesh and Aksai Chin, as part of its own going like the way China thinks that it will be a novel, nothing serious type of exercise.
Okay, Abhishek, I just want to tell you, this is a tightrope that we've seen China and India walk before. So I do want to ask you, the tightrope they've walked is obviously on one side, India saying, look, we're not going to have further diplomatic conversations until you solve this. And on the other side, China trying to dismiss these issues, whether it be Eastern Ladakh
there is an eagerness of engaging with each other. We have seen External Affairs Minister engaging with his Chinese counterpart, and N.S. Doval having had a conversation regarding border disputes with his Chinese. But Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping also had a meeting just.
All right, we'll try to strengthen the connection that we have with my colleague Abhishek. Remember, as my colleague Abhishek just pointed out, the G20 summit is right around the corner, just a few days from now. China is expected to attend, but this meeting will be coming just days after the Prime Minister and the President Xi Jinping, met on the sidelines of the BRICS summit, and it's there that multiple reports indicate they actually discussed Eastern Ladakh and the situation there. Now we have with us geostrategist Sushant Sareen, who's with us right now. I'll go over to him for his opinion and his expertise on these developments. Sushant, could you just tell our audiences, you are a senior fellow at ORF, and I do want to come to you with this question, sir. Uh, the timeline, the fact that this map was released just a few days before G20 is supposed to take place in Delhi, how much should our audiences read into it? I know China's trying to say this is something we do every year, and factually that is correct. They do release a map every year, but the fact that this happened at this point, how much should our audiences read into it?
See, the problem is not what the Chinese minister and the Chinese officials are saying about the timing of the release of the map. The problem is that the Chinese, many countries have claims and they publish their maps and they keep staking their claims. But the Chinese have a record of actually using those claims to then, belligerence, to indulge in land grabs, to indulge in these kind of activities, which causes a lot of disquiet in the region. So, for example, look at the South China Sea. Now suddenly they are incorporating the whole of South China Sea as part of Chinese territory. How any country can do something like that by manufacturing islands in the middle of the ocean and then saying that this is sovereign Chinese territory and we claim the entire sea as a Chinese lake. It's that track record of using these maps as part of their lawfare to then engage in warfare, which is really the nub of the problem. China was a benign country. It was not indulging in these kind of activities.
All right, I think we've also lost that connection with Mr. Serene. We will try to re-establish that connection. He was explaining to us right now the nature of the relationship the two countries share, because it is a relationship that obviously spans decades, but the way in which both countries have conducted themselves when it comes to this issue, the areas around the boundary between both countries, as Sushant Sareen was pointing out, the tradition almost that we've seen that China puts forth, wherein they publish maps, and every year in that map either territories are renamed or entirely new territories are included. There is also a tradition, as Sushant was pointing out, of not just India being affected, but other countries in the South China Sea. For example, Indonesia and the Philippines also registering their protest to other inclusions that take place in the South China Sea area. Taiwan, for example, Tibet. Yesterday we saw MPs from Tibet who were very vociferous about exactly this. So we are seeing a back and forth that does continue. Let's move on very quickly from this story. I do want to take you very quickly through a timeline of what it is that China has said so far on this. All right, we'll be bringing you more context in just a second. We'll be bringing you more details when it comes to what the long-term timeline has looked like when it comes to this. Let's move on right now to our next story. We aren't being able to connect to experts on this one. We will try to reconnect in just a second. Let's move